Hello, welcome. My name is Georgia Court. I'm the proprietor at bookstore number 1. I see it says my name is Bookstore 1 Sarasota. Sometimes I feel like that. I'll change it in a minute, but in any case, welcome. We're going to have, I think, a lovely, intimate chat with a wonderful author. And also in the chat function at the very top of it, I have put a link. If you've not yet bought Bonnie's book, there is a link where you can purchase it from us. So I hope you will do that. But today we have Bonnie Kistler with us. She's a former Philadelphia trial lawyer who attended Bryn Mawr College, where she graduated magna cum laude with honors in English literature. And she received her law degree from the University of Pennsylvania Law School, where she was a moot court champion and legal writing instructor. She's the author of The Cage and House of Fire. And excuse me, I am going to mute. She and her husband divide their time between Sarasota, Florida, and the mountains of Western North Carolina in Asheville, she tells me. So welcome, Bonnie. We're eager to hear all about your book.
Thank you, Georgia. My thanks to you and to Bookstore 1 Sarasota for hosting this event tonight. And also I wanted to congratulate you on your move to your beautiful new quarters in the Mark.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
For the benefit of our audience, I wanted to tell you that the bookstore has just recently moved from its location on the corner of Main and Palm to this beautiful new location on Pineapple. And, you know, I often run past there during my morning run, and I've been watching the progress over the winter of getting this facility ready for you. And for a while, I was despairing that it would be done in time. Then suddenly, miraculously, the books were in, and the magic happened. It all came alive at that point. It's a beautiful space for anybody who hasn't seen it yet. It's 2 stories with sort of this industrial chic vibe going on, and I think it's going to make a great venue for author events in the future. And I hope that when my next book comes out, which is expected to be in February 2023, that I might be able to come back and do an in-person event there after, hopefully after all of this madness of Zoom is over. I'm here tonight to talk about my latest novel, The Cage. It was just published 2 weeks ago, and I've been on tour since then. I just got back from Philadelphia, where it was bitter cold, and was very, very happy to get back to Sarasota. I started my tour in Delray Beach, then up the coast to Vero Beach, then further up the coast to Myrtle Beach. So for a while there, I was wondering if I'd written a beach read. Probably not. The Cage is, the mood's a little dark to be a beach read. The plot's a little too complex to be a beach read, but I think the one thing that The Cage might have in common with the, your typical beach read type book is the speed with which you can read it. People have been telling me they couldn't put it down. Unputdownable is a word I see all the time in reader reviews, which I'm not sure is a word, but I will take the compliment. It's certainly what I was aiming for. Some readers have told me that they finished this book in a single session, and I have mixed feelings when I hear that. On one hand, I'm glad that it's a page turner. That's obviously what I was aiming for when I wrote it. On the other hand, I think, do you know how long it took me to write this book? And you're reading it in 5 or 6 hours? I want to tell you about The Cage, but first, let me talk to you about elevators. A lot of people have anxiety stepping into an elevator. If you've ever gotten stuck in a broken elevator, there's a good reason to have such anxiety. Elevators actually trigger a lot of common phobias, claustrophobia being the obvious one, but there's some others that can occur. Basophobia, which is fear of falling. Agoraphobia, which is fear of not being able to escape from a trapped site. Xenophobia, if there's strangers on the elevator with you, you might be xenophobic. And then there's this word I just discovered recently, enochlophobia, which is fear of crowds. If there's a lot of people on these elevators, you may have seen the certificates they have showing that they passed inspection and what their weight or person limit is. And you'll be in a space that seems like it's about 4 by 4, and they'll say limit 20 people. They're like, oh my goodness, I'd hate to be in here with 19 other people. Well, I have a fear of a situation in elevators. Doesn't invoke any of those things I've just mentioned. None of those at all. My fear is getting stuck in an elevator with another person. Let me explain. As Georgia mentioned, I'm a retired lawyer, former lawyer. I practiced law for many years, always in big law firms, always in high-rise buildings. So I spent endless hours riding up and down in elevators. My fear was that somebody would come onto this elevator who was an adversary of mine, somebody with whom I'd recently crossed swords. I was a litigator, which is a 10-cent word for trial lawyer. And so I had adversaries all over town, actually all over the country, but I was concerned about the ones in town who might actually step onto this elevator with me. There was always this risk that somebody, opposing counsel or somebody else with whom I'd recently had words, might step on. And I'd always find myself a little uneasy when this happened. Usually nothing worse would happen than an uncomfortable silence, maybe an awkward conversation, but having a, thriller writer's imagination, which veers toward the lurid, I would imagine worst case scenarios. I'd imagine that we'd get into an argument, that it might, go on to escalate into shouting, then scuffling, physical assault, all the way up to murder. So it's this experience and that imagination that inspired the opening scene of The Cage. What is the worst that could happen when two people get stuck in a broken elevator? One of them has a panic attack and kills herself, or one of them has an opportunity for murder. That's the setup of this novel. And it's the question that hangs unanswered until the very end of the book. The story is set in sorry, let me get a shadow out of my face, a global fashion conglomerate, international fashion conglomerate is the company involved in this, what's sometimes called a corporate thriller. Their headquarters office, their showplace office, is set in a glamorous space on 7th Avenue in Manhattan. But the administrative functions, which would be accounting, law, human resources, are all handled in a suburban office, in this case, White Plains, New York, high-rise building in White Plains, New York. Late on a wintry summer night, two women are in the office, Lucy Carter Jones, who is a senior executive in the company and the director of human resources, and Shay Lambert, who is a low-level lawyer just recently hired by the company. Let me read some excerpts from that opening scene of the book. The fog hovered high over the city, invisible in the cold night sky, except for the diffused reflection of the urban sky glow. The only surface it touched was Marketplace Tower, the city's newest and tallest office building, where it painted a coat of rime over every sparkling facet of the spire. If anyone could see it, they might imagine a sugar-frosted fairyland, but no one could, in the fog, in the dark. 30 floors up, a woman stood very still at her office window. On a clear day, she could see the Manhattan skyline. Tonight, she saw nothing but her own reflection. She was in her early 40s, slender and petite, with alabaster skin and faded blonde hair cut in a stylish swoop. Although it was a Sunday night, her makeup was flawless, and she was dressed for a work day in a silk blouse and tailored trousers and pointed toe heels with the distinctive red soles that marked them as a high three-figure purchase. I'm getting some sun glare in here, sorry. She gazed at herself in the darkness, her face utterly still, until at last she turned and picked up her coat and pulled her office door shut behind her. A beep sounded as the electronic lock engaged, and she headed down the corridor. At the far end of the same floor, on the side without a view, the other point of light shone over a different desk. Its surface was covered with stacks of paper, flying flags of multicolored tabs on the margins and topped with Post-it notes. In the shadows, 6 feet away, stood a different woman, 6 inches taller and 10 years younger. She looked even younger with her sloppy ponytail and pale, bare-skinned face. She too was dressed for a work day, though not in designer wear. and she too stared at her reflection in the glass, but her face wasn't still. A muscle twitched at the corner of one bleary eye, winking on and off like a semaphore. She'd been at her desk for more than 14 hours. Wearily, she turned, slid some papers into a battered canvas bag, and picked up her coat. There was no lock on her office door, and she left it standing open. As she trudged to the elevator, a hush swelled through the penthouse corridors, broken only by the abiding hum of the building's mechanicals. They wheezed like a hospital ventilator on a comatose patient. When she arrived at the elevator bank, the older woman was already there. She didn't respond when the younger woman spoke to her. The center elevator arrived. The doors slid open. The women stepped on. The doors closed. 911, what's your emergency? We're stuck in an elevator. The power's gone out. Okay, can you tell me your name? Shay Lambert. What's your location? Marketplace Tower. We're stuck in the elevator. The power is completely out. I pressed the alarm button, but nothing happened. The intercom isn't working and the air compressor's out too, I think. We're in total darkness. Is someone there with you? One other person, Lucy Carter Jones. This is her phone I'm calling on. Is she all right? I'm not sure. She seems pretty upset. Let me talk to her. Okay, hold on. I have to turn on the phone light so I can see where she is. Oh, okay, here, there. They want to talk to you? I'm putting the phone to her ear. Hello, this is the 911 operator. Can you tell me your name? Hello, are you all right? Hi, it's me again. Lucy's not talking. She seems really out of it. We need to get her out of here. The fire bureau has been dispatched. Please stay on the line. I don't know. This phone's about to die. It's got like 1% charge left. Stay on the line. Rescue workers will be there soon. No, I better conserve the battery. I might need the flashlight again. Best if you stay on the line, ma'am. No, but thank you. Hello? Hello? The motor started up with a chug of gears that sounded like teeth gnashing. The lights flashed on, and I scrambled up off the floor and charged for the doors. The elevator plunged beneath my feet, so fast it felt like free fall, but I didn't care. I wanted down. I wanted out. In seconds, we reached the lobby level. The doors opened, and I burst out into a semicircle of waiting men. They were a blur of uniforms: policemen, firefighters, security guard, men in coveralls with oval name patches on their chests. I stopped and stared at them, but they were all staring past me into the elevator. I turned. Lucy Carter Jones was sprawled in the corner of the car. Her eyes were open inside raccoon circles of mascara, and she had a hole in her left cheek so neat it looked like someone had taken a paper punch to her face. On the wall above her was a splatter of blood and gore, and on the floor beside her was the gun, a snub-nosed revolver in a matte black finish. I felt sick, and then I was sick. I doubled over and heaved out a stream of yellow bile all over the gleaming marble floor. Two men lunged at me from either side, and they hoisted me up, their hands tight on my elbows and wrists. My toes dragged the floor as they propelled me across the lobby and through a glass door into an empty office. What happened? One officer asked. I took a breath to steady myself. She had a panic attack, I said. I guess that's what you'd call it. When the elevator stalled and the lights went out, she was making these sounds, I don't know, like a dog panting. I tried to get her to calm down. I told her that building security had to know what happened. We'd be out in no time. But it was like she didn't hear me. The intercom wasn't working, and it didn't seem like the alarm button worked either, so I called 911. I told her help was on the way, but she didn't respond. She was definitely hyperventilating by then. I was afraid she'd pass out, so I turned the phone light on to check on her. That's when I saw the gun in her hand. I closed my eyes and took another deep breath. I couldn't believe she had a gun. I didn't know what she meant to do with it. Shoot her way out? But then she was turning it, pointing it under her chin, and I realized she meant to shoot herself. I shouted no, and I grabbed for the gun, but she fought me. She fought me so hard. And then the two men exchanged a look, and as one gave a nod, the other pulled a laminated card from his pocket and began to read. You have the right to remain. Wait. My eyes darted between the two men. You don't think? No, she killed herself. He kept on reading in a monotone. Silent, anything you say can and will be used. I tried to stop her. His partner left the room again and went into a huddle with two newly arrived uniformed officers. Yes, I understand my rights, I said when the officer was done reading. I waived them. I'll tell you everything. I tried to stop her. Wait here. He exited the room, but he didn't go far. He stopped and stood just outside the door. He was standing guard, I realized. He was standing guard over me. That's the end of chapter 1. So you've heard what Shay tells the police, that Lucy had a panic attack and killed herself, that she had a gun in her purse and killed herself. The police are understandably skeptical of this story. Here's the problem. Forensics are not going to help. Because Shay tells them that she grabbed for the gun to try to prevent the suicide, her fingerprints will be on the gun as well as Lucy's. Because her hands were on the gun, she's going to have gunshot residue on her hands from the blowback, the same as Lucy. So the typical crime scene investigation information that we all have come to learn from TV shows is not going to help here. Now, the other thing that the police would obviously want to know is whose gun was it? That would help answer the question of what was intended on this elevator. But in this case, the gun in question was something you may have been reading about in the news, something called a ghost gun. This is a gun that's manufactured at home from a kit. The kits are sold online, and anybody with basic machining skills and apparently even 3D printers can make these guns at home. The kits are legal to sell. They're legal for homeowners, for DIY people to make, and they're legal for them to own. The only thing that's illegal so far is to sell these guns down the line. So they're unregistered, there's no serial numbers. So the police are unable to source the gun to either Lucy or Shay. So the resolution of this question is, was it suicide or was it murder, depends entirely upon the story that Shay tells them. Does she have any reason to kill Lucy? Did Lucy have any reason to kill herself? Shay decides that she will take it upon herself to persuade them that it was in fact the way she told them. But at the same time, her boss, the general counsel of this fashion company, a man named Ingram Barrett, who as I said, is Shay's boss, goes to great lengths to persuade the police of the exact opposite. The moment he hears about Lucy's death, he starts spinning a story that it had to be murder, that Lucy had no reason to kill herself. Why? His reason is the two of them were involved in a pretty heinous corporate crime. And if the police go looking into what possible motive Lucy might have had to kill herself, they're going to open a can of worms that he wants very much to keep sealed. So while Shay is desperately trying to persuade the police that it was suicide, Barrett is just as desperate to convince them that it was murder. The reader knows that Barrett is lying, but maybe Shay's lying too. There's just enough uncertainty to keep you guessing through this. Readers have told me that it's like a ping pong match, going back and forth, trying to figure out which one of them, which version is closer to the truth. Shay is what has come in the fiction world to be called an unreliable narrator. Some of you may have heard this term in connection with a couple blockbuster novels like The Girl on the Train or The Woman in the Window. The narrators in those stories were unreliable because, frankly, they were blackout drunks and couldn't remember what happened at key moments of whatever crime was involved there. That's not the case with Shay. Shay's very much in control of herself. She's a different kind of unreliable in the sense that she's deliberately withholding certain information from the police as well as from the reader. Every time you think you believe what story she's telling, something's revealed that makes you wonder if she's telling the truth or not. And another factor that Barrett comes to realize is that just because he's framing Shay for murder doesn't necessarily mean that she's innocent. He could be framing her and she could be guilty. Both those things could be true. The Cage has been called a bunch of different genre labels: a psychological thriller, an office thriller, a corporate thriller, a legal thriller. A lot of people have been calling it a locked room mystery. But as I understand that last term, I don't think it's an accurate description of this particular novel. The quintessential locked room mystery is the case where there's a dead body found in a room that was locked from the inside, so that it appears to be a physical impossibility that anybody could have murdered this man, because how did he get out and then lock the door from the inside? It's the physical impossibility that becomes the central question of that kind of mystery. The Cage is more of a what they call a closed circle mystery. You might recall the classic Agatha Christie novel, And Then There Were None, where a group of people are on an island and it's just this closed circle. It's just these people, one by one, they're being killed. So we know, or we think that it has to be one of the members of the cast that we've met. The killer has to be one of the people in that circle. In The Cage, the circle is very small. It's just two people. There's only two people, and so it has to be murder or suicide. There's only two possible explanations, or are there? When I was writing this book, I had half a mind not to reveal the answer at the end. I was thinking I would leave it open-ended, sort of like that old fable of the Lady and the Tiger, or the children's book, Choose Your Own Adventure, and let readers decide for themselves. But I did come to realize before I finished it that that would be very frustrating for readers. So I decided I would show my cards, and I do, but not until the very last page, not until the epilogue do we find out what actually happened in that elevator. The overall theme of this book is about human capital, the exploitation of labor across the spectrum of labor. And that's why I chose the fashion industry to set this in. We have the glamour of the designers and the models and the beautiful people at the top. We have the administrative people at the next tier, the accountants, the lawyers, et cetera. But then all the way at the bottom of this spectrum, we have the unfortunate workers in the sweatshops who are making the clothes that are designed by the glamorous people. All across that spectrum, I think we see labor treated as a commodity, and we see how it can be exploited in the system. The backstory of Shay Lambert, the young lawyer who's just come to work at this company, is that she came out of a squalid background, daughter of a single mother, very poor, squalid home life. But through brains and grit, she has lifted herself up. She's gotten an Ivy League education. She's gotten a job with a major Wall Street law firm. She is flying high when the 2008 Great Recession happens. And through no fault of her own, she's laid off from her job. From that point, she does engage in a lot of self-sabotage, with the result that she fails to get another job equal to the one that she had. The spiral, the downward spiral just continues, so that by the time 5 years later that she comes to work for the fashion company, she's been essentially underemployed and unemployed for 5 years. It's part of why she's so desperate for this job, so desperate to hold on to this job. Her labor, I mean, she was treated as disposable, as fungible, as employees often are. Anyway, that's the overarching theme of the book, and there's elements that I can't get into too much more without spoiling it. If I tell you much more, I'm going to give away the twist and turn. So let me tell you instead now about my journey to becoming a novelist, which I assure you has almost as many twists and turns as The Cage. I wrote as a child, started scribbling stories almost as soon as I could read stories. When I was just 11 years old, I decided to write a teleplay for my favorite TV show. And somehow, and I'm not sure how I did this because it was before the internet, but somehow I found out the address of the studio that produced this particular television show, and I sent them my teleplay. And it was handwritten because I didn't have a typewriter yet at this point. It was before I ever had a computer. They sent it back with a nice note saying, "We don't accept unsolicited manuscripts." They were kind enough not to say from children. So I was undaunted. I kept on writing. I started college majoring in English with the view toward becoming a novelist. I continued to write. When I was 19, I finished my first full-length novel, and I was so confident in it that I picked one of the big New York publishers and I sent it off to them. It came back with the same kind of note. "We don't accept unsolicited manuscripts." So this time I was daunted, and I decided that I really needed to have a profession that would pay the bills while I tried to be a writer. I didn't want to be a starving artist in the garret. I wanted to be able to support myself. So I went to law school. Went into private practice after law school, where I remained for many years. But I was writing the whole time. I never lost the bug. I finished another novel, perhaps 10 years later after law school. And this time I knew not to send it to anybody unsolicited. I had learned by this point, excuse me, that you had to have an agent if you wanted to have a commercial book deal. And that the way to get an agent was to prepare what they call a query, describing myself and my book, and sending it to agents that looked like they might handle this kind of material. I sent off a bunch of them. I got a response from an agent who was a big name, and I was thrilled. He wanted to sign me on. He wanted to handle my book. I was so excited that I hopped on the train from Philadelphia, went up to New York to meet him. We had a drink at the Oak Bar in the Plaza Hotel. And this fellow told me that I wasn't the only lawyer author that he represented. There was this fellow down in Mississippi. Perhaps you've heard of him. Can you guess? It was, in fact, John Grisham. That agent never did sell my book. I think he may have been pretty busy with Grisham, but I think it was also true that that book was not very good. I went ahead and wrote another one, decided to try a different agent. Another round of queries followed, and I was lucky enough that time to get representation with the agency that's continued to represent me ever since. They've sold 5 thrillers on my behalf, most recently House on Fire, and now, of course, The Cage, which has not only been published and is in the bookstores, but has been optioned to be made into a limited series on one of the streaming platforms. So there's been lots of excitement about this. Why do I write thrillers? What draws me to this genre? 3 things. First, what interests me most in writing is character. I'm a student of human nature. I'm an observer of people. And I think the best way to reveal character in a novel is to put people in peril or under extreme pressure. I think that's when their true colors come out, when you really see what this person is made of. And so the thriller lends itself to that kind of peril or extreme pressure. The next factor is the pace of thrillers. I like the brisk pace. I unfortunately get bored very easily. I think that along with the rest of our population, my attention span has gotten shorter and shorter, thanks to all of the media that we're exposed to at all times. I can lose interest in a novel pretty quickly if it's not moving at a good clip. If nothing much seems to be happening, my attention might wander. The brisk pace of a thriller keeps me engaged, keeps me turning the pages, and that's what I hope happens with my readers as well. And then the final thing that attracts me to thrillers is the realism. At least the kind of thrillers that I write are about things that could actually happen. I think that, again, it makes it more compelling for me if these are things that the reader can imagine this could actually happen. What would I do in the situation? How would I react? That's unlike, for example, sci-fi or fantasy, which I read happily, but I don't write just because I want that plausible factor. So my next novel, After the Cage, as I mentioned, is already done. It's going to be published about this time next year. It's also a thriller. It doesn't have a title yet, but we should see it next year, and hopefully next month it will have a title. And remember that big New York publisher that I sent my teenage novel to? That was HarperCollins. In a nice bit of serendipitous full circle, HarperCollins is now the publisher of The Cage and my next novel as well. So I wonder if I have any questions from the audience. I'd be happy to answer.
Anyone like to jump in? You need to unmute yourselves if you do. But I'd like to ask a question while we're waiting. Who as writers have inspired you to write, and do you try to pattern yourselves after them, learn from them? How do you use what you know about other writers?
When I was an English major in college, my specialty was the 19th century English novel. So it was Charles Dickens, the Brontes, Thackeray, George Eliot, these big, sprawling, vast novels. So I've not at all patterned myself after that, because that kind of book doesn't really have much chance of succeeding today, and certainly not in the thriller genre. My favorite novel of all time is Wuthering Heights. Again, I don't write romance. I don't write that kind of windswept psychological mystery, ghost story, all those elements there. As I was mentioning earlier, I like things to be realistic. And of course, there we have ghosts. So I don't pattern myself after that either. I don't know that I pattern myself after anybody contemporary. I do read, I have some favorite mystery thriller writers. I read everything that Michael Connelly writes, his Harry Bosch books, his Lincoln Lawyer books. John Sanford, I love the pace of his books. They're not really a mystery because in almost every case, you know who did it. And it's just a question of how are they going to catch him? How are they going to stop him? And the way that they moves along, I admire greatly. I don't know that I'll ever be able to write with that kind of pacing, but I think it's terrific. In the more domestic suspense sort of thing, I like Laura Lippman very much. Lady in the Lake is a recent one of hers, Sunburn. Ruth Ware from England has written a couple really fun books, and she's done something I admire. I don't know if I would ever do this, but she's written 2 books that are a deliberate homage to some classic books. She wrote One by One, which is an homage to the Agatha Christie book I mentioned earlier, where there's a circle of people and one by one they're getting killed off. And then another book she wrote recently, The Turn of the Key, is an homage to Henry James's The Turn of the Screw, with a nanny in a mansion that might be haunted and so forth. She does an interesting twist at the end to show that it's a different book entirely from the ones that she's patterning herself after. But I think they're fun books, and I recommend them to people everywhere. I don't read every thriller mystery that comes out, and one reason I don't is because I've gotten too good at guessing the ending. And with a lot of these books, if you're not surprised, it's no fun. You really want to be surprised at the end. And because I write these books, I've started to recognize the little writerly tricks that you have of, planting a clue early on, and I'll see it and I'll say, oh, okay, I see what you did there. I see what you did, and I'm going to figure it out. So unless it's somebody that really is a marvel at the surprise ending, I don't read as many of those books as you might think, since I write those books.
Yeah, interesting. Allison, did you want to ask something or say something?
I do have a question. Well, the reason I joined this is because I am also an attorney, and I was curious about how an attorney becomes a writer, but you already answered that. So my question now is, actually, you mentioned your book doesn't have a title. Is that because, is there a process where you end up picking a title? I guess you're not the author of the title. That's something the marketing people come up with. How does that work?
I had a title the whole time I was writing this book. I had a title. I submitted it. My publisher bought it with that title, but then my editor said, I don't think this title quite works. It has some connotations that might not work in the market. And they know more about marketing than I do. And so we've, come up with a few others. My light just went out. They've come up with a few other titles that we'll see. Hopefully there'll be a consensus on what does work. The Cage, that was always my title. Unfortunately, nobody objected to that one. To go back to the first part of your question about what being a lawyer prepared me for this. Are you a litigator by any chance?
Not currently. I was a judge advocate in the Marine Corps where I did court martials, but now I'm an estate planner. It's a much your life.
Well, in litigation or many other facets, including estate planning, part of what makes a good lawyer is attention to detail. And that's what I did as a litigator when I was preparing a case for trial. I would examine every document. I would interrogate every witness. I would make sure I knew every fact, everything that could have happened. And I think that kind of attention to detail helps in writing mystery thrillers, because you have to be sure that, you haven't laid the wrong path to the answer. Every detail has to be good. The other thing that, of course, as you know, writing is a huge part of a lawyer's job. And that's where I really polished my writing style. people say, oh, legal writing is so dry and dull. Well, not the way I wrote it. I mean, because I was a litigator, I was telling stories. I was telling the court what happened, and I was doing it in the most persuasive, colorful language I could get away with. So anyway, those two things, I think, are part of the reason why we see so many lawyer authors, because it really does prepare you in that way.
I'm impressed you found the time to write while you were practicing.
My first novel I wrote on the train, commuting to and from the office morning and evening, and I wrote it longhand on a legal yellow pad. It's easier when you consider it a computer, right?
Definitely.
It was hard to squeeze the time, to find the time to do it, but that's why it took a long time.
Well, the new book that you're working on, what is that about? What's this, a thriller, I assume, but what's the subject matter of that one?
This one may be a little bit controversial. It's about a woman lawyer who has built her career and a fabulous reputation representing men accused of sex crimes. Athletes and musicians are her bread and butter. She gets the phone call in the middle of the night. There's been an incident. She swoops in with a check and a non-disclosure agreement. Or when she can't get the woman to sign the non-disclosure agreement, she defends the man in court. And she has her reasons for doing this, but I think that she's attacked as being a traitor to her gender. People suspect that she's just in it for filthy money, but she's got reasons. But then something happens almost immediately at the beginning of the book that changes everything for her, and it's what happens from that point on that absorbs the rest of the novel.
Well, certainly topical.
Yes, yeah.
Right. There's nothing wrong with that. That's for sure.
And now that I've described the plot, I can tell you what the title that was rejected.
Yeah.
My title when I was working on this book was The Silencer, because that's what she did. She silenced these women.
Yeah.
But the fear there was that people would think of a gun.
Right.
Silencer and a gun, and that it would
Right.
confuse the market. So that's why The Silencer was rejected.
Yeah. But a good title, but a logical reason for rejection.
But you'd have to explain it. That's right.
Right. Exactly. Other questions? I see Clarence not saying a thing and not showing a face. Are there any comments or questions there? No. Well, so here you are in Sarasota, and you're not practicing law anymore.
No. I made the move for real several years ago, and left my firm in Philadelphia. Now, as you mentioned earlier, we divide our time between Sarasota and Asheville.
Well, that's a lovely thing to do, and lovely to be a writer while you're doing that.
Yes.
Well, if there are no other questions.
Thank you all. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Yes. Thank you, Bonnie. It's been lovely to get to meet you on Zoom. Who knew that you lived right down the street?
Yes. And I'll stop by soon.
Okay.
At your beautiful new store.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your.
Thank you for hosting
you
us.
being with us.
Look forward to reading the book.
Thanks very much. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night.